Hey y'all, welcome back to Unscripted, a calm take on the double standard. I'm Jen, and today we're talking about why some women are celebrated for their sexuality while others are judged for it. But before we get there, I think you have to understand something first. How life experiences changes your relationship with approval, and also what it means to be misunderstood. Because there was a version of me that lived in constant fight or flight. A single mom of three, always bracing for the next financial problem. Y'all heard that saying, robbing Peter to pay Paul? Yeah, I did that. And if I could sit across from her today, the only thing I'd say is, or one of the things I would say is, you're going to be all right. And this episode is not about defending a platform. It's more about evolution. And it's about how life experience changes the way you see judgment, sexuality, stability, and what it really means to stand on your own. Because I didn't set out to be the black sheep, but looking back, I've spent a lot of my time, a lot of my life outside of approval. Because when I was younger, I dated someone out of my race, someone my world did not approve of. I lost friends immediately. I lost acceptance from the people that I thought would always be there, which is my family. And that experience taught me something very early, like what it feels like to stand outside of belonging. And then later in life, being a divorced single mother of three brought a whole different kind of isolation. Financial anxiety, living paycheck to paycheck, constant survival mode. And somewhere in all of that, I became self-reliant. Not because I wanted to be, but because I had to be. And I'm not trying to erase that single mother of three who lived in survival mode. I'm integrating her. That woman hustled, she protected, she endured, and she stayed hyper aware. And she built the woman who can now be calm and strategic. To me, that's evolution. So when anyone reduces me to a quote unquote OnlyFans woman, I feel like they're erasing all of that, or trying to. That single mother of three, those years of survival wiring, economic anxiety, growth, strategy, reflection, that's what I'm pushing back against, not morality, the reduction. Because when I really step back and look at my life, there's a pattern. Only child, self-reliance, rejected for dating outside the norm, social exile, single mother, survival mode. And now, at almost 52, by the way, my birthday is next week. I will be 52 next week. So, and now I'm building income in unconventional ways, which is another form of moral judgment. Different versions of just the same experience. And I think that that's important to say out loud, that this isn't the first time in life that I've been misunderstood. It just looks different now. Because when I was a teenager, there was disgust around who I loved. And I can honestly say that if my mother were still alive today, she would probably disown me again. And I understand that there's a cultural line that I crossed. I'm not naive about that. I didn't drift here accidentally. But now, as an adult, there's disgust around how I earn what I do for a living. Different context, same emotional pattern. I understand the discomfort. I understand the instinctive disgust. But what I question is why that instinct so quickly erases a woman's complexity. And what I realized is I didn't become someone who avoids that feeling. I became someone who survives it. And that doesn't break me in the way that people think it should, because I've felt this before. I've been here before. I've already lost approval once, twice, and I lived. At some point, something shifts, though. You realize that approval is conditional, and survival, it doesn't depend on it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. There's still a small part of me that says, I wish it hadn't been that hard. Definitely, there's that part of me. But that's not bitterness, that's reflection. Because the stronger part of me says, but you handled it. And that's where the resilience comes from. I'm not the black sheep because I chose authenticity over approval more than once. And yes, that comes with a cost, but it also comes with something else, and that's autonomy. And that's something my younger self definitely didn't fully have, but I do now. So that brings me into the next portion of where I'm going to talk about two people. I'm going to use two people as an example. I'm going to talk about Alex Cooper and Dakota Johnson. If you don't know who Dakota Johnson is, she's the actress that played in 50 Shades of Grey. If you've read the book, some people might call it smut. I don't know. There's several words for that kind of reading. But she's the main character in 50 Shades of Grey. And I think that's what makes the conversation around sexuality so complicated, because not all expression is judged equally. Some women are celebrated for it, and others are scrutinized for the same thing. It's just packaged differently, and that's where I want to go next. So one thing I notice about myself that I'm trying to get better at is that I do this little smack, and I'm really trying to be more aware of that, and I'm really trying to get better. So saying that, let's continue. Sexual confidence is empowering until it isn't. Where do we celebrate sexuality? This question came up for me recently when I watched the Alex Cooper documentary. I watched a room full of people erupt in applause over a woman describing her sexual history. And there was a moment on stage where she even joked about giving really good oral sex. And the crowd went wild. And what surprised me wasn't the story, it was the reaction of the crowd. Because I knew instinctively that if I said the same thing, the response would be very different. And that made me ask another question, a harder question. What actually determines whether a woman's sexual openness is celebrated or shamed? I'm not saying she shouldn't have been applauded, and I'm not saying sexual confidence is wrong. I'm asking, why does status seem to protect some women from judgment? And I talk about moral hierarchy a lot. I talked about it in the last episode, moral condemnation in an attention economy. But there's an hierarchy in how society ranks sexual expression. There's categories that society tends to create. Got a married woman telling a past story, that's confident. A podcast host being explicit, she's bold. An actress in sex scenes, that's art. An OnlyFans creator, that's low value. Escort, that's dirty. Porn star, disposable. Now, I'm not saying those are the same things. I'm talking about perception, not equivalence. Because society assigns different meanings, different value, and different levels of respect to what is at its core is still sexual expression. And you see this play out in other areas too, even in music, where lyrics that clearly objectify women can be celebrated depending on who's saying it. Same sexuality, different labels. And back to the hierarchy. There's a hierarchy when it comes to how women are allowed to express sexuality. And most of us know exactly where we fall in it. A married podcast host can describe her college sex life and get applause. An OnlyFans creator says something similar, and respect leaves the room. The moment a woman monetizes directly, her status changes. Not necessarily because of the behavior, but because of the structure around it. And sex is everywhere. Intimacy is woven into mainstream entertainment, movies, television, music videos, advertising. We see love scenes, kissing, nudity, suggestive marketing, and most of the time it's accepted as storytelling or art or branding. No sarcasm, just facts. But when a woman chooses to present herself intentionally, when she controls the platform, when she benefits directly from the visibility, suddenly the tone shifts. It becomes about dignity, about self-respect, about morality. And I'm not saying all contexts are identical, but I find it interesting that intimacy framed as entertainment is normalized, when intimacy framed as autonomy is often criticized. So I keep coming back to this question. Why does context change how we judge it? Maybe it's not the intimacy itself that makes people uncomfortable. Maybe it's who controls it. Because we seem more at ease when intimacy is filtered through Hollywood, producers, directors, than when a woman directs herself. And this makes me wonder sometimes, the same people who talk about dignity and objectification, do they stop watching movies with love scenes? Do they stop respecting actors who film intimate moments for entertainment? I don't think these conversations are simple, but I do think it's worth examining why our reactions shift so dramatically depending on context. And I'm not saying that every form of sexual content is exactly the same, but I do think it's interesting that when intimacy is part of mainstream entertainment, it's called art. When it's self-directed, it's called degrading. Because we seem very comfortable, again, with sex as entertainment, just as long as we're not uncomfortable with who controls it. And this leads me to another question. Is empowerment conditional? Who gets to decide which women are empowered versus degraded? Who gets to be sexual and still be respected? Again, sexual confidence is empowering until it isn't. And what determines that shift isn't morality, it isn't behavior, it's status. Because when a woman is already successful, married, platformed, when she's protected by a brand, her sexuality becomes confident, humorous, empowered even. But when a woman without those shields says or does the same thing, it's desperate, vulgar, and low value. And this brings me to another example, and it was a Calvin Klein ad. Here we're talking about Dakota Johnson. She was in underwear, topless, with just her hair covering her chest, posed in a way that's clearly meant to be sensual. It's suggestive, it's provocative, but it's also very polished and very controlled. And again, it was their reaction. It was their reaction that stood out. Men and women were commenting on how beautiful she looked, because this Calvin Klein ad went viral on TikTok. And I love to read the comment section of a viral video. So the men and women, again, were commenting on how beautiful she looked, how confident she seemed, how effortless it felt. But one thing I did not notice, there was no language of too much, no questioning of her character, no reduction of her to the moment. No, just admiration. And that's where the difference, again, becomes really clear. Same level of exposure, same level of sexuality, but completely different interpretations. Because when a woman is already established, already respected, already protected by status, brand, or success, her sexuality is framed as intentional. Again, it's art, it's confidence, it's empowerment. But when a woman without those layers of protection expresses that same sexuality, the framing changes. People's opinion, it changes. Suddenly it's not confidence. It's desperation. It's not empowerment anymore. It's attention seeking. And it's not art. It's something to be judged. Not because the behavior is different, but because the woman is. And as someone whose sexuality is associated with a platform like OnlyFans, I'm very aware that the same expression would likely be received differently coming from me or another OnlyFans creator. So what exactly, and I would love to hear your opinions on this, what exactly changes when sexuality becomes monetized directly? So here's my observation about context and status and my position in that hierarchy. Because there's something very humbling about realizing that you occupy a lower rung in a moral hierarchy that you did not create. And OnlyFans is stigmatized because it commodifies intimacy. And people are uncomfortable because something that is usually private and emotional is being turned into something that you can buy. And to break that down further, when I think of intimacy, I think of sexual attention, flirtation, maybe even nudity, emotional closeness, and access to a person. And commodify is just turning it into a product that is bought and sold. People are uncomfortable when intimacy is openly sold. Some people believe that sex loses dignity when it becomes a product. And it feels different when sexual attention has when it has a price tag. There's discomfort around putting a dollar amount on something that usually is tied to love or commitment. And when people say OnlyFans commodifies intimacy, I think that's a fair criticism. There is a direct exchange and there's no pretending otherwise. But what I find interesting is how quickly that visibility strips a woman of dignity, as if the visibility itself is the moral line. So when I think about the stigma, I think it's about moral judgment, disgust reaction, status demotion, and the fear of destabilizing traditional structures. But it's the disgust reaction that hits me the hardest, though, because when people react to OnlyFans with, "Oh, that's gross," have some self-respect. And my personal favorite, "Her parents must be proud." That's disgust plus status emotion. And disgust has always been one of the strongest tools that societies use to police sexuality. When intimacy is visibly priced, it triggers something, not just disagreement, but revulsion. And revulsion often translates it translates into status loss. I'm not arguing people are wrong for feeling that discomfort, but I'm looking at how disgust becomes, again, moral hierarchy. Disgust doesn't automatically mean something is immoral. It means something violated a norm that they were conditioned to treat as private or sacred. Because if someone feels disgust, it doesn't mean you're dirty, you lack dignity, or you're morally inferior. And I understand that when someone says, that's disgusting, they're usually reacting to the explicitness, the transaction, the removal of romanticism, and the idea that intimacy is being shared with strangers. And maybe they're not actually reacting to you as a human being, but because identity is attached, it does feel personal. Because when someone hears OnlyFans and immediately they think low value, no self-respect, and yes, even disgusting. So what they're doing is compressing a full human being into one single category. And that's what stings. I understand the discomfort around the visible transactions. I even understand the instinctive disgust. But my question, again, is why that instinct so quickly absolutely overrides everything else about a woman. Because we often reduce OnlyFans to sexuality. But for me, the bigger shift wasn't sexual, it was economic. Financial stability, it changed my nervous system. Literally. Because money and nervous system regulation are real. And it took me making money for that really to hit home, for me to actually feel that realization. Because when you're not constantly worrying about survival, you think differently, you speak differently, you move differently. That's psychology, not ideology. Financial fear keeps the brain in fight or flight. Financial stability allows reflection. So this podcast may not even exist if I were still in survival mode. And hear me when I say this, I am not saying everyone should do OnlyFans. I'm saying this is what it did for me. Financial stability slowed my mind down. I'm not saying OnlyFans made me morally superior. I'm saying it gave me financial stability. And financial stability gave me peace. Before OnlyFans, I would describe myself as financially anxious, sheltered, even naive, always spiraling about money, living paycheck to paycheck. After OnlyFans, I'm 5 years in, by the way, I'm grounded. I'm slower, not chasing every dollar. And what I love most is that I'm more selective. I'm not romanticizing the platform. I'm aware that it carries stigma, it carries risk, instability, and most definitely carries judgment, but it also carried opportunity. And let me say again, financial stability changes your nervous system. And guess what? Losing it would activate it again. That's not weakness. That's biology. So even if my income changed tomorrow, let's say the platform disappeared. Now I know I'm capable of earning. I can take calculated risks. I know what it feels like to be stable. And this part right here, I know what decisions feel like when they're not driven by fear. That's a great feeling. This was the path that worked for me. It wasn't impulsive. It was considered. And when someone says, you could have made money another way, I certainly won't debate that. I'd say maybe. But this was the path that I chose after careful thought, and it changed my life in ways that go well beyond income. The before me, financial anxiety, survival mindset, reactive decision making, sheltered worldview. The after me, economic stability, slower nervous system, and intentional decisions. I don't know, I've got something in my intentional decisions. I don't separate that growth from the platform that allowed it. Financial stability empowered me. OnlyFans was the vehicle. And I'd like to say one last thing about OnlyFans, because I think it is grossly misunderstood. And it may not matter to some people, because some creators on OnlyFans are nude, completely nude. Some are very explicit. Others, they're not nude at all. They could be in bathing suits, lingerie, the same thing that you see in a Victoria's Secret catalog or whatever catalog you look at that doesn't have nudity in it. The platform actually hosts a very wide range of content. But culturally, many people don't separate those differences. And I just wanted to say that about the platform because, like I said, not a lot of people realize that. And again, it may not matter. So here's how my understanding of sexuality, dignity, and hierarchy has evolved over time. And because I'm closing talking about resilience and my own personal growth. 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I would have heard that applause on that documentary and reading the comments in that ad, and I would have felt threatened by it. But today I hear it and I see it and I analyze it. To me, that signifies growth. The old version of me would have been more defensive, maybe more combative, maybe more wounded. But the new version of me is curious, analytical. I've always considered myself to be an analytical person. Sometimes I think it's a curse, and sometimes I think it's a blessing. I don't know. The new version of me is also slower and less reactive. And the bigger realization is the issue isn't disgust. It isn't marriage. And it isn't transaction. It's reduction. And I refuse to reduce myself. That's evolution that I am proud of. I'm trying to embody that I can survive, I can evolve, I can calm my nervous system, I can grow out of fight or flight, I can become strategic instead of reactive, I can build stability, and I can make imperfect choices and still build dignity. I'm not saying do what I did. I'm saying whatever your path is, don't stay stuck in survival mode if you don't have to. I'm talking to single moms, divorced women, women starting over at 40, even 50, women rebuilding after loss, women changing careers, and women walking away from things. It's not about OnlyFans. It's about evolution under pressure. What do they say about diamonds? You know. Anyway, lastly, and I feel like I'm repeating this again, but it just needs to be said because there was a version of me who lived in constant fight or flight. She was exhausted. She was scared. She was responsible for everyone. And I wish I could sit across from her now and tell her, you're going to be okay. You're going to find stability and slow down. And one day you're going to be proud. I'm not proud because life was easy. I'm proud because I endured. I didn't allow the bad things. I navigated them. And one day at a time, even when my nervous system was on fire, that's resilience. I don't need everyone to understand my choices. I just need to understand them myself, and I do. So before I wrap up, I want to share a small update about the podcast. Going forward, I'm going to release new episodes every other week. So every other week on Thursday, because I want to make sure that each conversation is thoughtful and intentional, and this schedule gives me the space to do that. And next episode, I'll be talking about age. Big old age. What is the visibility expiration date? So I'll see y'all then, and thank you so much for listening.